Well, as James reminded me earlier, we did begin this week with annual conference, and I am here to tell you that it didn't go too bad, which is not really what I expected when I stood here last week. To be honest, I was not very much looking forward to it. It can be kind of long and boring, and we seem to find the dumbest things to argue with each other about. But it went pretty well. And we got to hear from our new bishop, Reuben Sines, and he is a wonderful preacher, and he helped us really to hone our focus in on Jesus. That being said, this is sort of a disclaimer, because then when I got back, there was a lot of other stuff, and I was already behind, and so I was like even behind her, and this, just heads up, may not be one of my most organized and polished sermons. So thank you in advance for your patience. When I heard the passage, and I'm going to share in a moment the passage that the bishop used in his sermon on Monday night in the service of commissioning and ordination. But as I was pondering this passage, it reminded me of something my dad had told me. So when he was a kid, he said the difference between him and his brother, his younger brother, the difference could be very well illustrated in their response to being asked to do a chore. For example, if their mother were to say, "Brad, would you like to take out the trash?" he would respond, "No, ma'am." Because it was a question, he answered it politely, and no, he did not feel like taking out the trash. Grandma would then say, "Brad, take out the trash." And he would say, "Yes, ma'am." And he would get up and do it. On the other hand, if their mother asked his younger brother, my uncle, to do a chore, "Ross, would you take out the trash?" he would say, "Sure." And then he would trot off and do whatever he was going to do right before she asked him that. And just keep going about his business, and if he eventually remembered to take out the trash, bonus, cool. If not, he wasn't super concerned. We have different levels of responsiveness. Some of us, including my dad, are very honest about communicating our feelings. Maybe a little bit too honest, a few people might claim. Some of us are more likely to just say what we think somebody wants to hear and then, go about our business. And the same apparently is true for those who want to follow Jesus. In Luke chapter 9, Jesus and his disciples have set out for Jerusalem. And he, from this point on in the gospel, is always moving toward Jerusalem. He has a clear picture of his mission. And beginning in verse 57, as Jesus and his disciples traveled along the road, someone said to him, "I will follow you wherever you go." Jesus replied, "Foxes have dens, and the birds in the sky have nests, but the human one has no place to lay his head. Then Jesus said to someone else, "Follow me." He replied, "Lord, first let me go and bury my father." Jesus said to him, "Let the dead bury their own dead, but you go and spread the news of God's kingdom." Someone else said to Jesus, "I will follow you, Lord, but first let me say goodbye to those in my house." Jesus said to him, "No one who puts a hand on the plow and looks back is fit for God's kingdom." Let us hear what the Spirit is speaking to God's people. That sounds pretty harsh. And we could say, perhaps, that Jesus was using hyperbole. I mean, he did do that. And that very well may be what part of this is. Not a take literally, but a demonstration, making a point, by going to the extreme. But I think it's a good metaphor. It's very telling as well. This first would-be disciple is very, very eager, wants to please. "Sure, I'll go." And Jesus, always knowing what he does, says, "Are you sure you know what you're saying? Like, do you know what you're signing up for? You need to know before you jump in and join the crowd." And the second one, whom he initiated the ask, he said, "Follow me." The would-be disciple says, "Yeah, okay, I'm willing to do that, but let me bury my father." And what's interesting to note here is that we have no context, so we don't know exactly what this means, but his father might not even be dead. He might be saying, as was a really important value in their culture, to care for one's parents up until the end of their lives and give them a proper burial. I mean, technically, he could have been saying, "Okay, Dad's service is Friday, I can jump in on Saturday." But he could have also been saying, it may be a year or 2 or 10 or 20, and then I can dedicate my life to you, Jesus. So this guy says he's willing, but he has some conditions. Jesus does not seem a fan of these conditions. And then the third guy, he says, "Okay," and it seems like he's kind of, threading the middle here. He volunteers, but he's not trying to be like, eager beaver here. He's going to play it cool, and he's saying, "I will come, just give me a second, I'm going to go say goodbye." And Jesus says this thing that sounds kind of unreasonable. "No one who puts a hand to the plow and turns back is fit for God's kingdom. What on earth do you mean, Jesus? What does he mean by that? Well, there's certain cultural contexts that might help us determine that. We all have cultural context through which we understand and interpret things that we just kind of all know about. For example, if I said, Simon says, touch your nose, what would you do? Touch your nose. That's a thing, right? Like, everybody knows that. You did fairly good. I mean, some of you not so much. But why do we treat Jesus says differently? We don't do quite the same. I heard a preacher, and I have no idea who it was, long time ago, probably at an annual conference, and I recall him saying that he had learned in his ministry that when God calls you, you pray about it. And when the bishop calls you, you say, yes, sir, or yes, ma'am, when you go. Why do we have different standards? Why is that? Well, one thing that is interesting, and the bishop used a video to explain in this agricultural metaphor, which I'm sure most of you do not need explaining, except for the fact that I'm betting most of you use tractors that have motors. They did not. They used oxen. And oxen are big, giant, powerful animals. Can be like up to 2,000 pounds each. And when you yoke them together, they can pull very, very hard, and they can pull a great weight. And their plow would actually be a wooden or metal object that was in the ground, and somebody had to steer this, though. Somebody had to steer the oxen. For those of you who are just like, really don't care, never going to be behind oxen, have lost in this metaphor, would you join me in your car, okay, behind the wheel? And you're going along, and you glance at something that catches your eye on the left. Be honest, what happens? We tend to move the wheel a little tiny bit to the left, even though we say we don't. Hopefully, it's not very long, we make a quick correction. Sometimes something on the right, you know. In the case of the oxen, same exact thing happens. They are very sensitive to just a little movement. So if you accidentally pull just a little bit more on this side of the rope than this side, they're gonna turn this way. If you do it the other, they'll turn that way. And then you're gonna end up with crooked rows. And you don't want that. That doesn't make the most of your land. So smart farmers will often put a flag, a post, some kind of sign at the other side of the field so that they can focus on that. And then put their hands on the plow and go straight. And that will keep their rows nice and straight. So Jesus is using this metaphor and saying, if you focus on where you're supposed to go, you keep it straight. Also, our bishop illustrated something kind of interesting. You know how Jesus says, puts your hand on the plow and turns back? What would happen if we turned back where we were going? We would do a lovely circle. Then we'd have some really messed up rows. And the point is that looking back doesn't get you anywhere. It gets you going in circles. I think this metaphor is helpful because we tend to confuse or conflate our priorities. Well, actually, that's part of the problem, the word priorities. Do you know that when that word entered the English language as priority, it did not have a plural because it meant the most important thing. Logically, you can only have one, the most important. Apparently not for English speakers. We're like, nope, watch this, I can have 5. And we have pluralized this word, and we think that we can have multiple priorities. But we're actually kind of delusional because you really can't. I mean, a lot of times your priorities may align in the same direction and things are cool. But at the end of the day, you can only have one. I mean, which one gets the final say? Which one breaks the tie? Most of the time in our lives, our most difficult decisions are not between a good and an evil. Those tend to be relatively simple decisions. They're obvious. We don't spend a lot of time stewing about those. There's a clear right answer. And whether we choose to do that answer or not, it's a different matter, but we don't lose a lot of sleep over it because it's obvious. Most of the time, our tough decisions are between two goods, between our priorities. Which one comes first? Of course, it was especially poignant at the service of commissioning and ordination. Those are people who are dedicating their lives to serving Christ. That's a priority. That's one priority. And although all people are ministers, all believers are called to serve and love and follow Christ, maybe it's a little bit more obvious, I suppose, in that call when you are given this task and you make vows. I vowed to spend all my time in the pursuit of the service of Christ. Like, really? Not even a little of my own priority time? Apparently not. All of it. My priority is God. And I know what God looks like because of Jesus. And so he encouraged all of us, and I was encouraged in my resolve to keep my eyes on Jesus and keep my rows straight. This metaphor has another important side effect. As I mentioned, one of the things that tends to happen at conference is we have to hash out our agreements or disagreements, our differences. We have to decide which differences make a difference and which are not so important. And we have to come to some kind of conclusion, or not. That happens too. But what our bishop encouraged us, and the way that I understood this in the context of this passage, we've learned that you have to keep your eyes on Jesus. You keep going toward Jesus. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to have a little oops, but we're going to be back on track, and we're going to keep going. If we are busy telling somebody else who also is following Jesus, who also says, I'm keeping my eye on Jesus and I'm going this way, if we stop to tell them, you're doing it wrong, where have our eyes gone? Not on Jesus. I think one of the most damaging things, one of the things that is most harmful to our witness to the world, is Christians who are constantly telling each other, you're doing it wrong. You're doing it wrong. Only this way counts. Only that way counts. What does that get us? As in, from the outside, looking onto our fields that we are plowing. It gets us really zigzaggy lines, crashes, going over each other's lines. It gets us just a big, muddy mess. And not necessarily any closer to Jesus. My metaphor then, the way I want to live my life, is to keep my eyes on Jesus. And if the person beside me says, I'm keeping my eye on Jesus, then I'm going to say, cool. And I'm going to keep going toward Jesus. And maybe they are doing it wrong. Maybe they will veer off course, but time will tell, right? That's not my problem, because my job is to keep going toward Jesus and plow this path that others can follow, that we can collaborate together and plant good seeds. And I think that's the healthiest thing for us to do, is to just focus on Jesus, and other Christians who say, I'm going to focus on Jesus, we go, awesome, and we keep going. And maybe we let God handle if they're a little off. If they are, that's what the Holy Spirit's for. And we are grateful. And we just keep on going. That's what I got from our bishop this week. Each week, we come for a reminder, a refresher, maybe just an opportunity to sit with some really good friends. We come wanting to experience something. And we who put together worship, all of those who help make this possible, our goal is that you experience God, that we provide a place where you can encounter God. And so we hope that's happened. And we hope that if you are feeling called to take a step on that journey to move toward Jesus, whether that's start your journey toward Jesus, or whether that is to join with us and go in our row and help plow this field that we have. Or maybe it's that you've done that, but maybe you looked away a little bit and you just need a little bit of help getting back, facing Christ. Then we would be honored if you would consider joining with us. That's what we're about here. We're about just keeping our eyes on Jesus and moving forward. And we would love it if you would join us. You can do that by coming and sharing that with me now, or getting in touch with me throughout the week. My information's on the front of your bulletin or on our website. And so please let me know. Why don't we all then, as we are able, rise and sing. Again, for choosing to be with us this morning, and for choosing to begin your week in worship with us. Thank you for joining us online and here as a people gathered in person together. We are all one, and may we go and keep our eyes on Jesus. Go in peace.